I'm JoAnn Morgan, and I was the instrumentation controller in this room, but in later years for the shuttle program, I was the director of payload projects, and then I was a safety and mission assurance director and associate director of the center. So I came back here, and this is like home.
Well, JoAnn, it's great to have you back. I'm Charlie Blackwell Thompson, as you know, Artemis Launch Director. We're sitting here at my console that we use for the Artemis launch missions. But you said that this feels like home, and it certainly feels like home for me too. Having been here for the Apollo missions and the shuttle missions, like when you walk in, does it feel the same or does it feel different?
Oh, well, the room is different. You know, the feeling of being in a launch control center is the same. And of course, these elevated floors feel just the same to me. I wonder if they are going to vibrate when you do Artemis. Did it?
They did.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, that was one of the exciting things for me with Apollo 11, because I wanted to sit at my console and feel that floor shake in my console. And even you don't have armrests on this chair. My armrests, I could feel bone conduction when at launch from the vibration, because the whole chair was actually sensing that. It was pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. You know, one of the things here in the firing room that some folks don't know is that when the vehicle lifts off and you get that kind of that pressure and that sound wave coming from the pad, you know, the windows will rattle. And during Artemis 1, it was the first time I ever experienced this, is I was standing here and I was watching the ascent profile and the milestones, and you know, you hear the windows start to shake, and then the floor began to vibrate beneath my feet, and it was the first time I'd ever felt that, where the floor moved. It was something incredible.
Yeah, it's a great experience to have. It's not just a visual experience or a hearing experience. It's your body feels the shock wave. I mean, you know, the bone vibrations are there, and it's just a whole body experience, mind and body.
It is, and heart.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Heart. Yeah. So JoAnn, tell me, like, I have to think back, how did you decide to become an engineer and your drive to be in this firing room? Like, what was that like in the Apollo time frame? I mean, there weren't a lot of women around back then in this room.
I was definitely an oddity. I saw Explorer 1 launched because I went to Titusville High School, and my dad worked for the Army and then for NASA out here, and half my class in school, people worked out here at the Cape. There was no Kennedy Space Center, it was Cape Canaveral. And after seeing Explorer 1 launch, and the Van Allen belt discovery and reading about that is what piqued my interest. Up until then, I thought, I'll probably be a piano teacher and get married and have 4 to 6 children, like my mom and my grandmother, you know. It just amazed me, that new knowledge that was coming from this rocket launch. Somehow I just knew that was going to be exciting. So I applied for a job as an engineer's aide, and I got selected for that job and came out here, and I worked at the Army's Missile Firing Laboratory, and that was in 1958 in June, and in October our laboratory was rolled into the newly formed NASA.
Wow.
So that's how I came to NASA.
Wow. And how many women were there in your work group?
Oh, none, just me.
None, okay.
In fact, I was the first woman summer student the Army had.
Well, I know you're quite legendary for being the only woman here for the Apollo 11 launch. I mean, do you look back at that? Did you know at the time, like, this is groundbreaking, this is history making?
Oh, the part about being a woman, no, and being the only one here in the firing room for Apollo 11, I didn't lock onto that being historic. What I locked onto is what we are doing. My work, the mission that we had was groundbreaking, historic. To me, I thought at that time, this is the greatest engineering achievement of humankind.
Right.
And that I already embraced that in my own intellect. And it wasn't until later that the idea that, well, yeah, well, I was the only woman in the firing room, and what that meant in terms of history. And my husband started me thinking about it because at the landing, it was in the middle of the night, we were watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, and they're landing, and they showed pictures of people all around the world that were enchanted by and watching the landing on the moon. And my husband said, we were drinking a glass of champagne celebrating, and he said, you're going to be in the history books someday. I mean, my husband was a teacher. He was a high school bandmaster, and he put it together before it ever entered my mind.
Wow, that's quite a story. And, for me, JoAnn, I mean, it's such an important thing. And I'm not surprised that you would say, no, I didn't think about that at the time. I was thinking about the mission, right? And the significance of the mission. But I do think you being in this room all those years ago was so significant for those of us who came after, because it really did say, there's a place in this firing room for you.
Well, what I think was important to me was afterwards, how it made me feel. For the first time, I felt respected. So what brought you here?
So, in a lot of ways, I think it was a couple of things. In some ways, I think it probably started at home in my family because, my mom was a big influence, and not in the specific thing that I would do, but she instilled in me this idea and this belief that you could do anything. And even though I grew up in a time, and certainly engineering, when I went away to school and started studying engineering, there weren't a lot of us women in engineering back then. I mean, because this is in the, in the 80s, late 80s. But I never had that feeling because my mom was always just so clear about you can do anything you want to do if you're willing to work for it. And so I had that belief. So to me, there were no roles that were, this is a role for women or this is a role for men. They were just all roles because that was the way that my mom had raised me and instilled in me. And then I had an amazing teacher. And teachers can have such a profound impact on their students. And so I had an incredible physics teacher who said to me in the 11th grade, Charlie, when you go away to school, what are you going to study? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, I think you ought to think about engineering. And I got the opportunity later to go thank that teacher because I don't know what I would have studied. I may have ended up in exactly the same place, but it was because of that nudge from him to think about engineering that when I filled out my college applications and it said field of study or major, I wrote engineering because that teacher thought that would be something, and he actually said something very profound to me, which I didn't find very helpful at the time. He said, we called him Doc, and I said, Doc, what would I do with an engineering degree? And he looked right back at me and he said, Charlie, what couldn't you do? And I thought, well, that's not super helpful, but it ended up being absolutely true. So I feel so indebted to him for encouraging me, for my mom for encouraging me. And then I had so many mentors along the way that have helped me grow, shared experience, lessons learned. And I think all of those things, brought me here. But like you, I walked in this firing room as a senior in college, and I knew when I was listening on the loops, and they were testing Spatial Discovery, getting her ready to go fly after Challenger. And I knew in that moment, I want to be in that room. I want to earn my place. And I can just remember that moment of knowing, like, that's where I want to be. And I've never left. And here I am 30 years later.
Yeah, well, good for you.
Yeah. So JoAnn, what advice would you give to young students?
I would say for young students, first of all, engineering is an incredible, incredible profession. Choose it. choose it. Learn the math, do your homework, and study hard. And this is a career that you can enjoy, and you can contribute and make magnificent things happen. And so that's one thing. But as a person also, your inner strength and learning and helping with awareness and acceptance of everyone in your work environment. And then you earn the respect with the work you do. If you do your job, first do your job, people will respect that. And I just would encourage any young woman to really seriously consider it, especially all of you 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds. You're feeling afraid, maybe you don't want to do biology and chemistry or anything that sounds hard. It's fun. I mean, cooking is chemistry and biology. I mean, you know, there's a lot of things that in your life that you would be proud of doing with an engineering background. So I encourage you, think STEM, think science, technology, engineering, mathematics.
I completely agree. I would say the same exact thing. You know, if I could be what that teacher was to me, to someone else, and say, think about engineering, think about STEM. And I would also repeat those words that he said to me, what couldn't you do with that degree?